Film Club.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Film Club. I'm one of your hosts, Andy Harrison, and with me, as always, it's Andy Donaldson.
Hello.
Every week in Film Club, we invite you along to watch a film with us, and this week, we're going into the wild.
We have Chris McCandless, who gives up his lavish lifestyle of post-education to become a supertramp, Alexander Supertramp, as he refers to himself as, who lives a nomadic lifestyle away from the materialistic obsessions of his parents. Ultimately, spoilers, ultimately leads to his demise. And it's the story of his life and how he grew up and his kind of philosophy that was, to be fair, his philosophy was based off the literature that he read. One character in particular, individual, Henry David Thoreau, who wrote Walden. I've got the book next to me. Who's features in Upstream Colour and even Fallout 4. And his teachings of naturalism. It's one that I've been meaning to watch a while. My mum really loves this film, and I have tried it once, and I couldn't get into it. And obviously, on this try again, I enjoyed it.
I am torn on this. Like, some of it I absolutely love. I think so.
Mm-hmm.
The cinematography by Eric Gautier is fucking incredible. It's absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
It's gorgeous. Like, the film is clearly taking a lot of inspiration from stuff like Badlands. It's taking a lot of inspiration from stuff like The Beach and I almost said Tree of Life, but obviously Tree of Life comes out after this. And it's funny because the film's directed by Sean Penn, who, when he then goes on to collaborate with Malick in the Tree of Life, they create something that I know you're not a big fan of, but they create like an aesthetic which I think is very alive in this film. That use of VO with a lot of like natural landscape photography, it's sort of laid in there to give you the introspection of the character. It's
also combined with a lovely soundtrack that really enhances that wild outback lifestyle, the use of country music.
And the music's apparently done by Eddie Vedder, is it? Sorry, Eddie Vedder.
He's one of them,
He's from Pearl Jam. I think the music is that pairing that creates like the tone of the film is, I think, what a lot of people really love from it. And I totally agree. It's this feeling of it being a coming of age film and getting out there into the world and learning about who somebody really is. And I think it's, in some ways that's really touching when you realize that, it's based on a real person's experience. This isn't just fabricated. It is retelling somebody's actual journey.
The pacing I really struggle with, because do you know what this reminds me of? When we did The Glass Castle, and you know how The Glass Castle goes around the life of who Brie Larson portrays, and then it goes in the back, and it goes forward, it goes in the back, and we mentioned about how it kind of knocks you off pace. This does the same, unfortunately, or at least some of those flashbacks go on far too long that you forget about where he is on the bus, the magic bus, as he says. There's some amazing scenes that are in the back. Like, some of my favourite scenes, I think the best scenes of the film, are the scenes where he meets the other people, the hippies, the isolated people. That lovely scene at the end where the older gentleman says, I'd adopt you, I'll be your grandfather, and he's emotional. It's a lovely scene.
But it's all very, very Nomadland. I feel like
exactly.
And Chloe Zhao took a lot from this film.
I agree. And what was really interesting, shout out to the guy with the mustache, Rainey, who later goes and writes a lovely song, sings a lovely song. He doesn't have any acting experience, and he killed it. Absolutely killed it in this film. The pacing really struggles because, the film's long as well. It's 2.5 hours long. And it could do with being cut. His thing that he's known for is being in Alaska and surviving, and that coming towards the end where he's struggling for food. I feel this film doesn't really show much of that. It doesn't really show much of his deterioration. Not that I want to film about one's deterioration as the struggle with hunger, but we only really get about 20 minutes of screen time regarding that. And I don't know, I was a bit taken aback that so little time was put onto that this film is based around that. I mean, the cover of the image is him next to the school bus, which is quite an infamous picture that he took, or the last picture he took. But
that would be one cool school if that was your school bus. I've absolutely no criticism of every sort of scene in this film. I think every individual moment in it is really good. I think that a lot of it is quite honest reflection. Where I struggle with it is where it eventually culminates. Like, it eventually comes to this sort of wishy-washy statement where he has meant to have learned from people, but also pretty much along the way doesn't learn from people. He's still, by the end, is like he's harboring this sort of like, you know, frustration and anger towards his parents, which is never released in a cathartic way. And I get that it's based on somebody's real life, but that doesn't always lend itself to compelling storytelling. I think that you get towards the end and where the old gentleman sort of sits him down and says, look, you've got to forgive people. And he brushes him off, and we're only like minutes away from the film ending, really. And he's brushing him off, and he's going off into the wild. And eventually there is that lovely moment where he writes in his book, you know, like, happiness is only worth it or whatever when it's shared. And you're like, oh,
Exactly.
he gets it. He does finally get it. But then you are robbed of that cathartic release of him actually going back home and actually fighting his way out of there and actually learning as a character. And instead what you get is this bittersweet ending. And I appreciate that some people are definitely going to latch on to that. Some people are going to think that's absolutely perfect. And obviously, in terms of being respectful, that is, I guess, somewhat ultimately, as far as we know, that's what actually happened. But it doesn't lead to a fulfilling story.
The lesson that we learn is he learns throughout the film, which is, you know, it's not always about running away from everyone. You know, there is that love around the people that you meet, those around you. And I don't think, as mentioned just then with the pacing, I don't think that, not saying this film has to be chronological, but the editing of this film and the way it's put forward doesn't really kind of lead you to this forward path of this realization. It's weird, Andy.
Some of the interesting things about the film that I think are worth mentioning. The fella who drops him off at the very beginning and gives him the wellies, the boots.
Oh, yeah.
So he's called Jim Gallion, and he's playing himself. Do you know Sean Penn had waited like 10 years to make this? So he wanted to make sure he had proper approval from the family. So as, you know, rather than pushing him, he just sort of like, you know, gently pushed, gently sort of nudged him and reminded them. And it took him 10 years to eventually get it off the ground, which, you know, credit to him.
Fair play to Sean Penn.
He handles it all with sort of a gentle touch. And then nice little thing, I don't know if you might appreciate this. The watch that he's wearing is actually Chris McCandless' own watch.
Nice. I did not know that.
Just nice that they've sort of made such care and attention to making sure the real story comes through.
And a lot of credit to Emile Hirsch, who does carry this film for the most part. I don't think he does a bad performance at all. Yeah,
he's fantastic.
Exactly. Yeah, his range of emotions and his ability to kind of like switch and almost like you can tell that the character of Chris, you know, real person. Sorry, you can tell that Chris has this shield, this emotional shield that puts up in front of him, and he might be opposed. Some great scenes about this, and I feel like Emile Hirsch really kind of shows that emotional shield and his kind of hesitation, but then pushing forward and reach for optimism of living in the wild. Reach for that. He keeps going, Alaska. Yeah, Alaska's my goal. Even the part where he comes out the train car and gets beat up, he pushes on forward. It is a coming of age film. It is, it's tough.
Never mind the fact that he has that like incredible physical transformation as well.
Oh God,
which absolute hats off to him for that, because that is some dedication to the role.
Yeah.
Well, I think ultimately for me, this film comes down to, I think of when we did The Beach, and I think that this is a better version of The Beach, but it still doesn't quite ring true for me. There's a lot of like, there's concern over leaving quiet in the film. They constantly want to put some sort of dialogue in there. It doesn't quite have the confidence I was hoping for it.
I completely agree.
So there is Into the Wild. You can let us know in the comments below what you thought of Into the Wild. But Andy and I are going to be back once again next week, where it's time to take a look at Wind River.
Cheers, guys.
Until then, get watching. Whoa.